My name is Elena Brooks. I'm 33 years old. And I didn't know the end of my relationship would arrive without yelling, without slammed doors, without even raised voices, until my boyfriend muted the TV, turned toward me, and said 4 words that quietly rearranged my life. We need to talk. We'd been together for 2 years. Long enough that people stopped asking how we met. Long enough that routines replaced effort. Long enough that I thought comfort meant safety. We met at a friend's wedding, bonded over dry chicken and warm champagne, laughing in the corner like we'd known each other longer than a single night. He was charming in an effortless way, confident, ambitious, the kind of man people naturally gravitated toward. I was steady, reliable, the kind of woman who showed up when she said she would. At the time, I thought that balance was love. That Tuesday night in April, we were sitting on his couch watching a reality show he liked. I don't even remember what it was. Something loud and dramatic. Contestants crying over manufactured chaos. He muted the TV. I noticed the silence before the words. "Elena," he said, folding his hands like this was a meeting. "I don't think this is working anymore." The room tilted, just slightly. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested this conversation was more exhausting for him than devastating for me. "You're a great person," he said. "Really, but you're predictable." Predictable. You work your 9 to 5. You go to the gym the same days every week. You wear the same clothes, order the same food, plan everything in advance. You're safe. I waited for the rest. "Safe isn't exciting," he continued. "I'm 34. I want more. I want someone extraordinary." Extraordinary. The word echoed. "So this is about someone else?" I asked. "No," he said too quickly. "This is about me not wanting to settle." Then he laughed. Actually laughed. Not cruelly, worse. Casually. Like he was commenting on the weather instead of dismantling a future we'd been building. I stood. "You're right," I said calmly. "I'm not your type. Elena, don't be dramatic." "This isn't dramatic," I replied, reaching for my jacket. "This is clarity." I walked out while he was still explaining himself. The drive home was quiet. No tears, no screaming, just a strange stillness. When I got inside my apartment, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. Not critically, not kindly, honestly. Then I grabbed a notebook, and I wrote down everything he said I wasn't. Exciting, passionate, risk-taking, extraordinary. I didn't know it yet, but that list was about to change everything. I didn't wake up the next morning transformed. There was no dramatic montage, no sudden confidence, no overnight glow-up that made strangers stop and stare. What I woke up with was resolve, the kind that sits quietly in your chest and refuses to leave. I went to work like normal, answered emails, sat through meetings, nodded at jokes that weren't funny. From the outside, nothing had changed. But underneath it, something had cracked open. That list, the one I had written the night before, I folded it and tucked it into my wallet, not as a reminder of him, but as a record of how small I'd allowed myself to live. The first change wasn't dramatic. It was discipline. I'd always gone to the gym, but casually. Maintenance, comfort. The same machines, the same pace, the same excuses. This time I hired a trainer. His name was Daniel, and he didn't care that I was tired, or that my form wasn't perfect, or that I'd had a long day. He cared that I showed up. 6 days a week. The first month was brutal. My muscles burned. My confidence lagged behind my effort. I wanted to quit more than once. I didn't. By the 3rd month, my body felt different, not just stronger, but capable. Like it could carry more weight than I'd ever asked of it before. The second change was how I presented myself. I donated half my closet, not because there was anything wrong with my clothes, but because they were chosen for invisibility, neutral, safe, unremarkable. I worked with a stylist for the first time in my life, someone who asked me questions no one ever had before. "How do you want you to feel when you walk into a room?" I didn't say noticed. I said confident. The woman who walked out of that fitting room still looked like me, but sharper, intentional, unapologetic. The third change was the one that scared me the most. I quit my job. Not impulsively, not recklessly. I planned. I saved. I built a client list quietly on nights and weekends. I'd always wanted to start my own consulting practice, but stability had kept me frozen. 3 months after the breakup, I handed in my notice. The fear was immediate. So was the exhilaration. I said yes to things I'd always postponed. A spontaneous road trip, a language class, a climbing gym, even though heights terrified me. I wasn't chasing chaos. I was chasing presence. By September, I barely recognized my life. And that's when I met Noah. It was at a networking event, one I almost skipped because I was tired. He wasn't flashy. He didn't dominate the room. He listened. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Work, ambition, failure. The things people don't usually admit out loud. He asked thoughtful questions, remembered details. When he handed me his card, he didn't push. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said, "if you're interested." I was. Our first date wasn't loud or dramatic. It was easy. And for the first time in a long time, easy didn't feel like settling. It felt like alignment. By October, we were officially together. And the strangest part? I didn't feel like I was proving anything anymore. I felt like I'd finally arrived. Success doesn't arrive with fireworks. It slips in quietly, almost politely, and then one day you look around and realize your life no longer resembles the one you were afraid to lose. By November, my business was stable, not just surviving, growing. I'd signed 3 long-term clients. I was fielding inquiries instead of chasing them. I hired a part-time assistant and started looking at office space instead of working exclusively from my kitchen table. I was busy in a way that felt purposeful, not draining. Noah fit into that life effortlessly. He didn't compete with my ambition or diminish it. He asked questions, celebrated wins I hadn't even thought to celebrate myself, reminded me to eat when I forgot. One night, while we were cooking dinner together, he said, "You know what I like most about you?" I smiled. "I'm afraid to ask." "You're brave," he said simply, "but you don't perform it. You just live it." I didn't tell him then how close I'd come to never discovering that part of myself. The past found me anyway. It started small. A mutual friend mentioned my ex-boyfriend had asked about me at a bar. Another said he'd been unusually quiet lately, that he'd left his job, that things hadn't turned out the way he'd expected. I felt nothing, until the doorman called up one Thursday afternoon. "There's a man here asking for you," he said. "Says he knows you." I almost said no. Curiosity won. When I opened my door, he looked different, thinner, tired, like someone who'd been chasing something that kept moving further away. "Elena," he said softly. "Thanks for seeing me." "What do you want?" I asked, staying in the doorway. He swallowed, to apologize. I waited. "I was wrong," he said, "about you, about everything." He talked for several minutes, about fear, about mistakes, about how he'd confused excitement with instability. "I miss you," he said finally. "I want another chance." I felt something then. Not anger. Clarity. "I'm happy," I said, "and I won't shrink myself again to make someone feel bigger." He nodded slowly, like he'd known the answer before he asked. "I see you now," he said. "I know," I replied, "but you're too late." When I closed the door, my hands weren't shaking. That was how I knew I'd truly moved on. December arrived quietly, wrapped in deadlines, early sunsets, and the kind of cold that makes everything feel sharper. Noah and I had been together just over 3 months, long enough to feel solid, short enough that everything still felt intentional, not rushed, not assumed. For his birthday, I'd made reservations at a restaurant downtown I'd been wanting to try for years. White tablecloths, soft lighting, the kind of place you plan weeks ahead for. We were seated near the window, city lights reflecting off polished glass. Noah looked relaxed, happy, comfortable in a way that didn't dull the edges of who he was. Halfway through our appetizers, I felt it. That instinctive shift in the air. I looked up and there he was, my ex, standing near the entrance with a woman on his arm. She was polished, stylish, laughing a little too loudly. He looked tense. Our eyes met. The recognition was immediate. Noah followed my gaze. "Is that?" "Yes," I said quietly. "That's him." He didn't ask anything else, just reached across the table and laced his fingers through mine. We kept talking, kept eating, kept laughing. And that was the real victory. A few minutes later, my ex approached our table. "Elena," he said. "Hi." I looked up slowly. "Hi." His eyes flicked to Noah. "I didn't know you were here." "It's Noah's birthday," I said. "We're celebrating." Noah stood and offered his hand. "Nice to meet you." The handshake was firm, unthreatened. My ex nodded, clearly recalculating. "Well," he said finally, "you look incredible." "Thank you," I replied, and meant nothing more. An awkward pause stretched. "I should go," he said. "Yes," I agreed gently. He walked back to his table without looking back. The rest of the evening was perfect. Not because of him, but because he no longer mattered. 6 months later, Noah and I were talking about moving in together. My business had grown enough that I was hiring again. I'd booked a trip I'd once only talked about taking someday. I ran into my ex one last time at a coffee shop in March. He smiled politely, asked how I was. "Good," I said, "really good." He nodded. "You were never ordinary." I smiled, not for him, but for myself. I know. Some chapters don't need dramatic endings. They just need to stay closed.